I'm going to walk through the process of creating a 3/4 inch grid. For our selfie project. Okay, so that's probably not the most readable, but our grid is going to be on a 3/4 inch grid. Doing this on our 9x12 good paper will give us a 3/4 inch border all the way around. Okay, so you're going to have a border that you're not going to use for drawing all the way around. These measurements here are what we're going to use, and we're going to measure across this way and across this way because we always measure twice and connect once. Okay? Don't try and eyeball it, don't try and guesstimate, don't try and see if you can get it straight. Just go ahead and measure twice. It will save you a ton of time, because if you don't measure twice and you try and eyeball it, you will have crooked boxes. Okay? So I'm going to put my ruler at the top of my page. Some of the measurements disappear when I'm that high, so I'm going to put it right here. So I'm going to measure along this edge. I'm going to mark, and then I'm going to move my ruler down here and measure again. Here are the measurements. We're going to start with 3/4 of an inch. I'm going to lightly put one mark. Can you guys see that? It's right here. And then the next measurement is 1.5 inches. The next is 2 1/4. The next is 3. You will always land on 3, 6, 9, and 12. And if you don't, then you have miscalculated. Okay, so then 3 3/4, 4 1/2, 5 1/4, 6 inches, 6 3/4, 7 1/2, 8 1/4, 9 inches, 9 3/4, 10 1/2, 11 1/4, and 12 is here on the edge of my paper. If you're not great with different quarters and where you're landing on your ruler, you can also measure this way. Let's see if it'll let me zoom in. Okay, I cannot zoom. So on your ruler, you have a whole inch, you have a 1/2 inch, you have a 1/4 inch. If we count by quarters, we would start at 0, and this would be 1/4, that's 2/4, that's 3/4. Then I'd make a mark. Okay? Next, 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. I'm going to make a mark. 1, 2, 3, mark. 1, 2, 3, mark. Notice I fell on the number 3. Okay? If I have my ruler down here and I measure that way at the bottom of my page, alright, so I have it lined up, I'm going to mark every 3/4 of an inch. Notice I'm measuring with my 0 on the same end of the paper. That way, if my paper is not perfectly square, at least these lines will be parallel. Okay? So I'm going to measure 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, make a mark. 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 Notice I landed on number 3. 1, 2, 3, mark. 1, 2, 3, mark. 1, 2, 3, mark. 1, 2, 3, mark. Again, notice I landed on number 6. Okay, so here's a quarter, here's the second quarter, here's the third quarter. I'm going to make a mark. The first quarter, the second quarter, the third quarter. I'm going to make a mark. 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, make a mark. 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, make a mark. If I hadn't landed on 9, I would know to go back and check my work. Okay, I'm going to fix this one because I don't like its mark. Okay, and I'm drawing a little bit darker than I would normally because I want you to be able to see it on the video. 1, 2, 3/4. 1, 2, 3/4. 1, 2, 3/4. And 1, 2, 3/4 ends on 12. Okay? Now I'm going to connect these. Make sure that when you're connecting these, you're lining up your marks and making sure that you're perfectly straight before you lightly hold your pencil higher up so you don't draw too darkly. Make a line that goes all the way down. I'm going to do that on my other side because now I'm going to measure up and down. And the reason for that is that I'm going to leave the border empty. So I only want to measure on this line so I have less stuff to erase here, okay? So I'm going to line up my ruler. My zero is going to go on the edge of the paper. It can be on this line, it can be just over this line. It's not that big of a deal. I'm going to go just over the line so that you can see the measurements a little better. I'm right here on the edge of my paper. Make sure it's right on the zero edge. And I'm going to mark off every 3/4. 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. Okay? Not going to count it out. 3/4, it's 1 1/2, 2 1/4, 3 inches. 3 3/4 inches, 4 1/2, 5 1/4, 6. 6 3/4, 7 1/2, 8 1/4, and 9 will fall on the edge of my paper. I'm not going to turn my paper. I'm not going to turn my ruler. I'm just going to slide it over to the other side of the paper so I'm measuring from my same edge. That way if my paper isn't square, at least my lines are all parallel and perpendicular to each other, or as close as possible. I'm going to start with my zero right on the edge of my paper. I'm going to mark off 3/4, 1 1/2, 2 1/4, 3. 3 3/4, 4 1/2, 5 1/4, and 6. 6 3/4, 7 1/2, 8 1/4, and 9 would normally land right on the edge. It's a little bit off, which tells me that my paper is not perfectly square. Now I'm going to connect the outside 2 marks on the top and the bottom, lightly, again holding my pencil higher up rather than down here where I can press really hard. If I hold my pencil higher up, then I will draw a lot lighter. I'm going to connect my 2 marks here. Now I have my border. If I want to, I can go back and go ahead and erase these little extra pieces here. And now I'm going to lightly connect all of the others here in my box. Okay, I'm going to start this way, making sure that my lines match up with my measurements. If you don't actually use the measurements because you think they look crooked, you will end up with crooked lines because your measurements were right on. You should trust yourself. If you've double checked your measurements, you should trust them. I'm going to continue connecting, not pressing hard into the paper. If you press too hard into the paper, your pencil will create a dent in the paper since this paper is so thick and it compresses, which means that now you have lead in a divot in your paper, which makes it 1, hard to erase, and 2, if you can erase it but there's still a dent there, when you try to shade over it, it will show up. Okay? You know all those spy movies where they go into the hotel, somebody's written on the pad by the telephone, they rub a pencil over the top sheet of paper that was left underneath what they wrote, and all of a sudden they can tell who wrote what and what they wrote, and then they can go find that person. Okay? Works the same in art. You press too hard, you're going to see all of those marks on your paper. Okay? Now I'm going to go the other direction, making sure that I'm lining up my measurements and drawing lightly. My drawing here is darker so that you can see it on the video. I don't want it to be invisible for this because I want you to be able to see what I'm doing. If I was doing it for myself and not drawing a grid on a video, each of these lines would be considerably lighter to the point where I almost couldn't tell if I actually drew them, just so that when I am actually doing the drawing, I can see them, but I'll be able to erase them, and they will be a lot easier to erase and cover up as I'm drawing. So it does not matter if you have this in the portrait or the horizontal location. It will work either direction. The measurements work either direction. So now I have a grid. It's my 3/4 inch grid. All right, these are the measurements I used. Okay, it jumps by 3/4 of an inch each time, and if you notice, there is a pattern here. 3/4, then a half, then a quarter, then 3. It starts with a large number, smaller, smaller, and then without a fraction. And it all repeats, okay? So for those of you who are into math, check it out. It's all a multiples of 3s. Everything repeats every 4th time because it's 1/4 of an inches, and we're doing 3 of them, okay? So I personally like to letter down the short side and number across the long side because I find it easier to remember larger numbers. So I'm going to lightly, in the borders, put in my letters. You should go from A to J and 1 to 14. Okay, so now I have a 10 by 14 grid. I can now use my image that I gridded off already, my 5 by 7 photo, which also has a 10 by 14 grid. However, this is a 1/2 inch grid, which means that I'm increasing it by 1.5 times here. So this image will be exactly 1.5 times this size. If you have a hard time with measurements in the future, you can use that 1.5 to actually put your ruler on here and say, look, Miss Meyer's mouth is exactly 1.25 inches here. What's that times 1.5? I know, it sounds like big math, but it could be really helpful. All right? Now, I can use this to start transferring all of this information over to here. There's 2 methods. You can go square by square, where I'm going to look at A1, and I'm going to look at A1, and I'm going to transfer it over. Okay? Or I can go line by line. So you can either go square, shade that in, square, shade it in, next, all the way across, and then start back over. Or you can say, I'm going to find this point, this point, this point, this point, this point, and then I'm going to connect all my dots and get my face shape in, and now I'm going to create this part and follow lines, okay? I personally follow lines because I'm impatient. I will say that most students who have a hard time with drawing and getting things accurate, and they say, I can't draw, if they go square by square, when they get to the end and they look at it, they're amazed at how close this looks like what they created. What they created will be so close to this, it'll look just like them. Okay? If you have a hard time with other boxes in here, you can split those boxes in half and then find the box on here and split it in half, just like we did in our practice. I hope this helped. If you have questions, just ask.